All right, good afternoon and welcome to Supply Chain Now Radio. We're broadcasting live today from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Scott Luton. I'm your host for today's session. Today, we're going to be focused on one of our favorite topics, leadership. In particular, we're going to be sharing perspective on what 2018 taught us about leadership. Our guest speaker today is Elba Pareja-Gallagher, who I believe still holds the world record for most appearances on Supply Chain Now Radio. Her fresh perspective consistently gets great feedback and provokes our listeners into new ways of thinking. So we're glad to have her back. More about Elba in just a moment, but as always, we're glad to have you with us here on Supply Chain Now Radio. All right, so let's tackle our ground rules. All attendees will be on mute as we're looking to optimize the audio experience. Now, with that said, let's make it as interactive as possible. So please do submit your questions via the chat toolbar. We'll answer as many as we have time for at the conclusion of today's webinar. And finally, a PDF of today's presentation and a recording will be available in the next few days to each of our attendees. Okay, so let's take a minute to recognize our sponsors here at Supply Chain Now Radio. Couldn't do it without them. Big thanks to our sponsor, Apex Atlanta, which has been serving the Metro Atlanta community since 1964. Apex Atlanta is a nonprofit industry association dedicated to the supply chain management space. To learn more, visit us at apexatlanta.org. And special thanks to our sponsor, Talent Stream, a WeBank certified recruiting and staffing firm that specializes in helping organizations find top talent in the engineering, manufacturing, and supply chain space. To learn more, visit us at talentstreamstaffing.com. All right, our listeners are in for a treat today. Elba Pareja-Gallagher is a finance and strategy professional with 20 years of experience at UPS. She's held roles in finance, investor relations, marketing, and strategy. During one particularly exciting chapter in her journey, Elba lived as an expat in Asia for 3 years. After working on a cross-functional team developing long-term strategies for global e-commerce, Elba recently transitioned to a new role as part of UPS's business intelligence and analysis team, reporting on U.S. domestic product performance. Elba is also the founder of the social impact organization ShowMe50.org. The nonprofit's vision is to achieve 50% women in senior leadership positions through a grassroots movement. Show Me 50 programs teach leadership skills, career management strategies, and influencing techniques. Elba holds a Bachelor of Business Administration degree from Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi, and a Master of Science in Supply Chain Management from the Florida Institute of Technology. Elba is an Apex certified supply chain professional, serves on the board of HOPE, which is the Hispanic organization promoting education, and is chair of the UPS Hispanic Business Resource Group, Cresser. In fact, Cresser was recognized in 2017 as the #1 Hispanic employee resource group by the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and Latina Style magazine. So with all that said, please join me in welcoming Ms. Elba Pareja-Gallagher.
Thanks so much, Scott. I'm very excited to be here and ready to talk about what 2018 taught me about leadership. These are lessons and experiences from my own working and personal life. I want to take a minute to talk about a pronunciation you just made. Scott and I have a great relationship, and you talked about the Hispanic BRG as crecer, and it is, in Spanish, we say crecer, and it means to grow. And so in our effort to continue education, right?
That's
a little
right.
Pronunciation.
Duly noted.
Okay, so what 2008 taught me about leadership. We're going to cover 5 different points, and I hope that it can be interactive and that our audience will be brave enough to ask a few questions. So let's get started. The very first thing I want to talk about is this photograph. Scott, what does this kind of make you think of?
Oh, anger, pressure, not
Anger,
progressive
pressure.
collaboration.
Conflict, the opposite of collaboration. So my first leadership lesson from 2018 was that civility and kindness are in short supply. I know we're already a month into 2019 and we may tend to forget, but maybe not. 2008 was 18. We had our midterm elections and there was just a lot of controversy and complexity in the year. You may remember there were all sorts of harassment of political opponents, name calling. I remember at one point people were even being mocked in restaurants. People weren't able to eat at restaurants all over ideological differences. There was a lot of rudeness. And I think all of that begins to flow into the rest of our lives, not just what we see on social media. I found an interesting study out there from a public relations firm. It's coming from Weber Chandwick, and they do an annual study of civility in America. And here's a couple of quick numbers for you. Back in 2016, they identified among all Americans who have experienced incivility encounters per week, how many did they have in 2016, and then in 2018 they did it again. So in 2016, online, there were 2.6 uncivilized encounters per week. Offline, meaning in person, at the grocery store, at work, there were 3.6. So 2.6 a week online, 3.6 uncivil encounters offline, in person. So that's a total of a little over 6. Fast forward to 2018, and there were 10.6 uncivil encounters per week. And now it was pretty much split even between offline and online. And so the numbers bear out what we were feeling last year. And that just really got me thinking about how that flows into the work world, and what we can do to not be desensitized to that, and to really lead organizations and work teams that are more civil and professional and respectful. And the good news is that also in that survey, they talked about the fact that many people still remain hopeful. Roughly what they're saying here is that despite the high incidence of incivility, the majority of Americans are at least somewhat hopeful. Basically, 71% are hopeful for a more civil future, and 81% believe that highly controversial subjects can indeed be discussed in a civil way. And this picture, reminds us that at work, every so often, things can be very tense. A lot is riding on, our organization's performance, our team performance. People have different opinions, and it requires leaders to really step up and transcend this type of environment. We have to rise above. And so I'm going to give you a few of my tips on how we can do that. The first thing is that ignoring bad behaviors does not make them disappear. It's easier to ignore things, not to confront the challenge, but they're still going to be there. And particularly if you're in a supervisory and leadership role, it's our responsibility not to ignore bad behaviors. We have to be proactive. We have to lead the way and demonstrate through actions that our teams can see that when behavior is not okay, that we call it out. We've got to have a zero tolerance policy. We've got to say things like, that's not okay. I find that to be one of the easiest, less stressful ways to respond without any judgment, is to simply make a statement that, hey, on our team, in our organization, that's not okay. Let's tackle this in a different way. We want to reinforce cooperative behavior and model the ethical use of power among the staff. So we don't have to just call out bad behavior. Let's demonstrate that we support and encourage cooperative behavior. In fact, one of the ways we can do that is by setting up workstations and work groups that have more collaborative space, as a simple example. I know that many organizations are starting to reorganize their workspaces, and having that collaborative joint space is one way to demonstrate that we want a cooperative environment. And we've got to have leaders who use their power in a good way, in an ethical way, and that we call out when leaders in power do not. And then lastly, I like this phrase here, prevent and correct, right? As leaders, the lesson that I take with me from this uncivilized 2018 is, how can I as a leader both prevent and correct? And by that, I think we can become more inclusive leaders. We can communicate on complex social issues and engage the increasingly diverse audiences and stakeholders. Make people feel included by actually not only giving them a seat at the table, inviting them to meetings, but actually engaging them, giving them an opportunity to speak and to present their point of view and to listen. And so those are my lessons from the uncivilized world we were in 2018 that we can now turn over, rise above, and address in 2019. The next one, number 2, that I want to talk about, this slide there's a lot of fire, a lot of heat, a lot of pressure. You can see the gauge there is about to give off the warning signs, right? We're about to burst into flames. So this slide is number 2. Corporate pressure is at an all-time high. There is no doubt about it that in the market today, there's more and more pressure on organizations and even nonprofit organizations. So from all angles, both for-profit and nonprofit, everyone is being challenged by their industry and by their competition. A couple of examples in the professional world and in the for-profit world, the labor market is so tight, and Scott, I'm sure you can totally relate to this. You know, the competition for people is crazy. I've just never seen it like this. You can barely hold on to your talent. The minute you get someone trained, they've already got a bigger, better offer. It's pretty tough. Wages are increasing, so overall costs are increasing for organizations. There's a lot of pressure, and you can see that in the things that are happening in the market. You know, General Electric, once a big, bellwether, and now is becoming a turnaround project. People like Apple, who we've always looked at as, cutting edge, they too have had some challenges very recently. Organizations like Tesla and Elon Musk have run into problems. Facebook, it's one after another. So there is a lot of corporate pressure. And as a result, we've got to up our game. We have got to transform, both as companies, but especially as individuals. And that's what I'm here to talk about, is what can we as individuals do to help our organizations in this time of all-time high pressure. And so here's how we rise above. We've got to resist comfort. It's easy to just want to sit back, keep doing what we're doing, and collect our paychecks. But the truth of the matter is that just isn't going to cut it anymore, neither for an individual, because as I just mentioned, the competition for talent is so high. You've got to up your skills and make sure that you are competitive as an individual and that you are adding value. Color outside the lines, I say. I know that, kids, we were always taught, hey, stay in the lines, make your pictures nice and neat. But in today's world, things are very messy. And if we really want to rise above, we have got to figure out ways to color differently, to use different colors, to find different pictures, and be creative and really color outside the lines. Something else I like to think about is I believe we have to seek out a shock to the system. It's not enough to have this slow, easy growth anymore, because other organizations who have much more access to cutting-edge technology than legacy companies, they're able to shock the system. I think back to, I think it was a few years ago when Amazon talked about drones. I see that as a shock to the system. It immediately forced everyone else to start thinking about that type of technology and what they were doing to do something very radical. And of course, we all said, yeah, I'm not going to be seeing drones flying around. And here it is 2018, and we aren't seeing drones flying around. But you do see them in some specific applications. And so I think that if we want to rise above the corporate pressure and find a way to advance exceeding our competition, we've got to look for something very radical. We need radical transformation. I have a quick story. Back in December, I attended a panel. The University of Georgia Executive Education has a partnership with the CFO Roundtable, and they bring together CFOs across many companies here in Georgia. And at the panel, it was about transformation, and they had the CFO and the CTO, Chief Transformation Officer of Equifax there. And as you'll recall, Equifax was in a bit of a crisis situation, right? They had a big gap in their technology, security, and it created a time of crisis where they had to react. And the CFO and the CTO said some things that really resonated with me, so I'm going to share those with you. The CTO said that, transformation requires you to do only initiatives that create fundamental change, right? Back to this radical transformation. She said, and this was Julia Houston, she said that real transformation means that things changed so much that you don't even remember how things were before. And so for many of us, when we work in large organizations, it's pretty hard to make radical change. There's so many decision makers, so many rules, and rightly so, there's a lot of risk to be mitigated. But it's better to do that ahead than be forced in a situation like Equifax, where you're in this reactive mode from a point of crisis. And so again, when you talk about fundamental change you're making, either as an individual, as an organization, is it so radical that you don't even remember how things were before? Because that's what it's going to take in this high pressure environment. Another thing that they said that really stuck out to me was from the CFO, and they talked about how, once you're in this mode of crisis, you've got a lot more stakeholders that are very engaged, and they may be different kind of stakeholders. He talked about how they would have daily board calls, and there's a lot of pressure. And the way they measured success was how fast were they able to spend money to fix things. Okay. Scott, do you still see my slides?
We sure do. Absolutely. So to our audience, we may have a little technical snafu. Elba, if you can hear me, we can see your slides. So bear with us just a minute here. Okay, so to our audience, give us just a second or two here. Had a little technical glitch. Murphy's Law is alive and well. And we're going to get Elba back on and continue this leadership presentation. So hang on one second. Okay, Elba, are you back with us? Hey, Elba, we can see your slides, but we cannot hear you. So, to our audience, we're working through a little technical glitch here. Bear with us for a second. Elba, we can see your current slide is triumph over transition, but we cannot hear you. What you can try to do maybe, Elba, is switch to either the phone voice audio connection and then maybe switch back to the computer.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. So I thought that it's a perfect transition, right? Because we just had a radical transformation required there due to technology difficulties. But I'm back. So here we are. The next lesson that I learned from 2018 was that we have to triumph over transition. During 2018, I was unexpectedly reassigned. I like to affectionately say that I was transformed. Like many organizations, we are going through a transformation and coming up with super great ideas and new structures and better ways of doing things. And so in that process, I got a new assignment. And so this image I thought was quite appropriate because that's how I felt. I went from one place to the other. I had to just throw out a rope, go find my bike, put on a cape, and figure out how I was going to get from something that I hadn't done for many, many years. And in a situation where I was replacing someone who had retired and I didn't get any training or transition time. And so what that taught me was that you have to really find your grit and make it happen. So these are the ways that we can rise above when we are forced into a situation of transition that was unexpected. The first one is get your emotions out of your system. So when there's radical change, it can be a big stressor. And for me, it helped to be able to talk about it with my closest confidants and friends and just get it out of your system. Either there's everything from anger to disbelief to the other end, right, which is excitement. And the question that you have to ask yourself is, how can I get from the negative emotions to the positive emotions? It starts by getting it out of your system. Next, I found that you really have to take some time, I call it, to be still, to reflect, to let everything sort of gel, and to recognize that through radical change can come a lot of great things, but you have to really come to terms with it and let it happen for you. The next thing is to channel your inner corporate athlete. Many of us are hard workers. We want to do better. We want to be innovative. We educate ourselves and we are inclusive leaders, but we have to work really hard. And so just like people who are into fitness, working on our mental and physical health, I think we have to do that in the workplace. One thing I do is I use inspirational quotes, and something that I post at my desk, which helps me in this regard over these radical transitions, are quotes from Michael Jordan. We all know that Michael Jordan is definitely one of the greatest athletes, and there's 4 quotes I'm going to read you that I just love, and they keep me motivated when things get really tough. The first Michael Jordan quote is where he talks about how many shots he's missed, and he says that I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games, 26 times. I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over and over again, and that is why I succeed. The second quote is, some people want it to happen, some people wish it would happen, and others make it happen. The third quote, if you quit once, it becomes a habit, so never quit. And then I think my all-time favorite, because it's hard when you speak up and challenge the status quo, again, this is Michael Jordan, if nobody will help you, do it alone. And so when we want to rise above radical transformations, we really have to channel our inner corporate athlete, put one step in front of the other and keep going. The next lesson is find a thing that really inspires you, something to fix. I find that when you can become laser focused on solving a problem, it takes your mind off of all the other noise and allows you to be very successful and to channel your true gifts and your energy into a mission. And I find that that's very helpful. I can relate this story, which doesn't have to do with work, but my
house is having a leaking problem from so much rain here in Georgia, and our basement is having a bit of a flooding situation. And so over the weekend, my husband and I got out and, climbing ladders, trying to figure out what's going on with the gutters. And I find that when you are laser focused on the problem like that, it takes your mind off of everything else. And so I would encourage you to replicate that at work. Find a thing that inspires you, something to fix, and focus your energy on it. And then just do it. Put one foot in front of the other and just get it done until you get your groove back. And so those are my lessons from this item, which was, how to deal with a transition. Okay. This image is a microphone, and behind the microphone is a large audience. And so this lesson came from when I was going to speak at an event, and I didn't realize it was so large. So I show up at the venue, and as a speaker, you always want to pre-trip your room. So I walk into the room, and it's one of those very large ballrooms, and it was set up for over 600 attendees, and it's the largest audience I've ever done, and I was quite surprised by that. And so I went back to the speaker's room, and there were other speakers in there, and I saw this other lady sitting in a corner, and she kind of looked a little deer in the headlights as well. She too didn't realize the venue was so big. So my lesson learned here is to face the unexpected with confidence. In the speaker's room, I saw this woman, and I started speaking to her, and I told her that I didn't realize the room was so big, and it relaxed her because she was able to share with me that she didn't realize it was that large of an audience either. And so by approaching something with confidence, you're able to tackle it and feel better about it, and you just do it. And so here's my recommendations when you find yourself in a situation. Number one is you're not alone. Just like I mentioned, the other lady in the room, she was actually thinking the same thing, and had I remained silent there, I would not have been able to help her as well get over the fear and the surprise of having such a large audience that we were going to be speaking in front of. Don't be distracted by the noise. I mentioned this in the previous lesson as well, right, in terms of transitions. There's a lot going on around you, but you have to put that behind you and not let it distract you from the mission, which in this case was that I was prepared, I had great slides, and I was going to do a great job, but had I let the noise of the big room and the things I didn't expect to distract me, it could have gone a different direction. The third point is that remember that you have earned the right to be there. Whatever thing you're involved in where there's some unexpected challenges, you've earned the right to be there, and do it with confidence. Don't second guess yourself. I've heard often people talk about something called the imposter syndrome, and that's where you believe that you may not belong, that you are an imposter, that you don't have the credentials. And I think that we tend to be too hard on ourselves. Remember, you have earned the right to be there. Fourth is fake it till you make it. If you feel a little uneasy, just don't let it show, right? You want to demonstrate confidence, because if you think it, then you can soon have physical displays of what you're thinking, right? So think you're confident, act like you're confident, you're going to look confident, and then you will be confident. Okay, the fifth one, which is very interesting. It's something I'm the most passionate about because, as Scott mentioned in the beginning, I am the founder of a nonprofit organization, Show Me 50. Our vision is to achieve 50% women in leadership positions across corporate America. It's a very challenging topic to talk about. Not too many organizations feel comfortable talking about gender. In fact, recently I had seen some postings where organizations are trying to talk about it, and the kinds of comments that you see are quite disheartening, and these are from people in your own organizations. And so it's hard to do this, but this is another lesson from 2018, which is that speaking up is hard to do. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to impart upon you some ways to help you see that you can speak up and why you should. Yes, it's hard and it does take courage, but out of this next segment, I want you to know that I want you to find your courage, and I want to tell you why it is so important that you do. So how are we going to rise above the fear that we feel in speaking up on any number of issues? I'm not talking just about gender equality, but in our organizations and in our homes and among our friends. How is it that we can talk about things that are difficult? So the first thing I want you to think about is what it means when we're silent, right? When we're silent on a particularly challenging topic, it really means that we're approving, right? You may think that being silent prevents you or keeps you from being involved in a conflict, but that's not really true. It's really the opposite of that. When you don't speak, that itself is a form of communication. So you think you're not involved, but you are, right? If you don't disapprove, it doesn't make you seem more easygoing. It just, people may think that, you know, you're somebody that's not involved, that you remain silent. You know, it may actually destroy trust, because when things keep going and you withheld information down the line, people may remember that you said nothing. The second thing I want you to think about is, you know, are you harming others? You know, when you remain silent, you think that you're trying to avoid criticism and to avoid challenges, but what if the situation is going in a dangerous direction and you remain silent, right? You actually may be harming the people that you would otherwise want to help. Another way to think about not remaining silent is that you want to show your commitment, right? You want to demonstrate that you're invested in this, whether it's something at home or in your professional life. What are you doing to be honest and to demonstrate that you are in this together, right? That you want to see things improve, that you want to make things better. Another way to think about speaking up is that you have a great, unique perspective. You have skills and abilities and knowledge that maybe other people don't. The obvious may not be so obvious. And so it's incumbent upon you with your special skills to really raise the issue, to let people know what might be different that they're not thinking about. You want to be at the table. An executive mentor of mine from another organization once told me, I was asking him, you know, I felt like I wasn't really prepared for a big presentation and that maybe I shouldn't attend this high-level meeting. And he said, Elba, never, ever pass up the opportunity to sit at the table. Do you want decisions and ideas to be made without you or not, right? He said, never pass up the chance to sit at the table. So same thing with, you know, speaking up. You want to be there at the table and have the opportunity to state your opinion. The next one is, you might not be alone. Keep in mind, we've talked several times, I think so far in this presentation, that you know, you may not be alone. Others may be thinking the same thing. I like to use the standing ovation metaphor, which is when you have a standing ovation, initially you have one person that stands up. Everyone else is kind of on the sidelines. Gosh, should we stand up or should we not? Then you might have a few more people stand up. And eventually, everyone stands up. So my challenge to you is, are you going to be in the people at the very end who are always, you know, waiting for someone else to take the risk, or are you going to be in the lead and rise above and lead the standing ovation? Foster a bring it up culture. What you want to do as an inclusive leader is to make sure that your teams and your organization fosters a bring it up culture. That means that if you feel something is important, if you have an opinion and a perspective that needs to be heard, we should have a safe environment where we encourage people to bring it up. I was recently in a meeting where a leader did a fantastic job of this. Not only did she open up the meeting by saying that in this meeting, I want everyone to feel like they have a voice, and that if you have something to say, I want you to feel comfortable that we want to hear it. And then during the meeting, as people talked, she noticed that people would ask questions, and she felt that some people's questions weren't fully being addressed. And so she'd circle back to the person and say, you know, John, was your question addressed efficiently? And I just thought that was so incredible, a great way to demonstrate this bring it up culture. Next is, are you modeling what you teach your children? Scott, you and I talk about this a lot. We have 3 beautiful children, particularly one young lady who's amazing. And so my question to parents is always, hey, all those lessons that you're teaching your children, are you modeling them at work? And why is it any different? If your kids saw you at work observing some of the behaviors you do and remain silent, would they be proud of you? Are you demonstrating the values that you teach your children?
So
I'm ending with this: silence is complicity. Scott?
I was going to weigh in for a second on that note, Elba. Real quick, I know as you're wrapping up the presentation here momentarily, but a phrase that we try to use as often as possible in our household is PTK. So we try to be patient, tolerant, and kind. And we all know that, and we try to model that for our kids. Some days are not like others. Some days are much more challenging to put the PTK in action. But to your point, kids are always watching you, and they're always learning from what you do, and we try to keep that in mind for sure.
I'm going to have to use that, PTK. Love it. Thanks, God. I ended up here with this phrase, silence is complicity. And it's selfish. I never really thought of it this way, but when we are silent, it's about us. It's about, oh, I don't want to feel uncomfortable. Oh, I don't want to rock the boat. People may perceive me differently. But what if you're remaining silent on an issue that's hurting other people? And so think about that next time you feel uneasy speaking up about something. Could it be that you're actually being selfish? And is that the kind of value that you want to live? Okay, so that was pretty deep. Let's do a quick review of the leadership lessons. Again, these are things from my own life and my own experiences, and I hope that they're able to help you and that you're able to apply some of them in your world. So number 1, we talked about that civility and kindness are in short supply. And I say that we have to model the behavior, right? Be the change you want to see in the world. How can we demonstrate through our actions that we value civility and kindness? PTK. Number 2, corporate pressure is at an all-time high. What can we do as individuals in our own way to help our organizations and our teams? I think we've got to be creative, and we've got to break out. We've got to break out of the status quo of the way of doing things. Scott, before the call, we talked a little bit about one way that we might be able to do that is to really get involved in communities and organizations, both the not-profit side and the for-profit side. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit more. Triumph over transition was the 3rd one. Remember, I was donning my cape and riding the bicycle across the 2 cliffs. That's how I felt when I got transformed in 2018. I'd say that you've got to find how to just push through. Just do it. It takes grit. Grit really is all about your courage, resolve, strength of character, determination. So that's what it's going to take. Be fearless. Number 4, face the unexpected with confidence. Remember the microphone in front of 600 people that I wasn't expecting, and how I also helped another woman in the room recognize that we could do it. Fake it till you make it. Think it and do it. And number 5, speaking up is so hard to do, but if we do not, silence is complicity. We have to live our values. Why not stand up, speak up, don't be afraid, or actually be afraid, but do it anyway, right? It takes grit. And with those, I think we can rise above. And I think with that, Scott, we're going to move into the Q&A session if there's some questions. I do want to make a plug. I put an image there. My organization, showme50.org. Our next event is February 25th, and I would welcome our audience in Atlanta if you're around. It's going to be a fantastic experience using a system called Lego Serious Play. We're going to have a facilitator, so go to showme50.org and the event page, and you can learn more about it. So Scott, do we have any people that have questions?
We do. We sure do. And so to our audience, we've got about 12:40. Now's the time for your questions. You can use the chat toolbar to submit those to us, and we'll pose those to Elba verbally. So we've got several questions already submitted, Elba. The first one comes from Natalie. And Natalie mentioned who was the person at Equifax that Elba references for the quote?
Yes, and that is the Chief Transformation Officer was Julia Houston. It could be Houston, but Houston, like the city. And also there was the CFO, Chief Financial Officer from Equifax, and that was John Gamble. And they did a terrific job. And again, that was the CFO roundtable at the UGA School of Business.
Terrific. Thanks for the question, Natalie. Thanks for joining us. The next comment comes from Barika from Alabama, and she mentions not fake it till you make it, but she mentions fake it till you become it, which I think is an interesting little twist on the cliche phrase.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's what we have to do. Certainly at work, demonstrating your confidence and just, act the part, even if you feel like you aren't there yet. Keep doing it. And to her point, practice makes perfect, right? So the more that you do it, then you actually do become it. Great point.
All right. Next question comes from Tyrone. What have you done, Elba, to diffuse a very uncomfortable situation at work?
Yeah, it can be so uncomfortable when you're in a meeting and people start getting, really hot about some issue, right? They'll raise their voice, they might stand up, especially if you're in the room and you're not the leader. It is particularly uncomfortable. But whether you're leading the meeting or you're just an observant, I think the very first thing is just to remain very calm and to maybe, speak and say, hey, everybody, let's take it back a notch. Let's look at this from an objective perspective. And maybe I think using people's names is in a calm way is always helpful. So you might say something like, John, you're making some great points. Susan, I like where you're going in this direction. Let's take a minute and regroup. You might also suggest to take a break. I think the key is remaining calm, showing your leadership, using people's name in a calm way. And then I think also at the end of the meeting is to just make sure that you leave it in a very positive tone. I think we should thank people for their commitment to the topic and having the courage to speak up on a very complex issue, right? It goes back to one of my earlier lessons where I talked about we want a collaborative environment and how you support people when they are speaking up, but we just need to kind of slow it down, slow things down.
Absolutely. That's not a, over the weekend, we were looking at some documentaries on the Challenger disaster and tragedy. And if more folks, to your point, Elba, were willing to slow things down and call timeout sometimes to stop pressure to make decisions that shouldn't be made, a lot of things could be avoided. So I think that's a great takeaway from this webinar. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to call a timeout and audibles. The next comment comes from Amanda, who Amanda wants me to give credit for PTK, which I should. So we've got to give that to Francis from our SALT group. So that being patient, tolerant, and kind comes from Francis. So a good point, Amanda. Keeping me on my toes. Elba, next question comes from Latanya. How do you sign up for the Lego event?
So you can go to showme50.org /events, or go to the events menu on the main website, and you'll see the list of upcoming events, which will include this Lego Serious Play workshop, as well as a few other events. So be sure to go to the Show Me 50 website events page. Great.
And we hope to see you there, Latanya. Next comment comes from Steve, who we just hung out this weekend in Orlando. Steve was down there as part of the APICS and ASCM conference. Steve says, I like the concept if you are in the room, you earn the right to be in the room. At times, teaching the management to recognize that can be the challenge. Elba, your comments?
Yeah, so I think what he's saying is teaching the people who are leading the meeting, or maybe who are creating the meeting, to recognize that the people who are in the room have earned the right to be there. Maybe it refers to, are the leadership listening to the people who have earned the right to be there, perhaps. I'm not sure if he's got a little more follow-up, but yeah, a lot of times as leaders, we have to recognize that we don't have all the answers, and that we should be listening to the people who are at the table. I've often heard that, a lot of larger organizations tend to hire the smartest people, but yet they don't listen to what they have to say. They try to direct their work rather than letting them be the ones telling you what to do, because they have earned the right. They do have the skills and diversity of thought that we ought to be listening to.
Yep. I appreciate your perspective there. And Elba, I think you're right. I think Steve's referring to making sure management understands and recognizes that if they're in the room, they should be listened to. Oftentimes we're not listening to the experts that know it. So good point there, Steve, and follow-up commentary there, Elba. Elba, this comes from Teamer. Teamer says, great webinar today. And he's also asking, how can he get invited for the Lego event on 25 February? So as Elba mentioned earlier, Teamer, that's a public event. We welcome all folks. And to learn more and to sign up for that event, you can go to showme50.org. Right, Elba?
Yes, and I want to give a couple of shout outs. Number one, of course, to Apex, who has been such a huge supporter of Show Me 50 and the Apex Gender Gap Task Force, but also to sponsors for this event include 3CI, which is where we're actually going to hold a meeting, which is their beautiful headquarters on one of the top floors of their building right off of Hammond Drive, and also to Yvonne Bryant Johnson and Associates, who is going to be our trained Lego Serious Play facilitator. She's done this workshop from big names, and so appreciate both of those organizations' support.
Terrific. And thanks to those sponsors for making the Lean In Circle happen on February 25th. Next question, Elba, comes from Vivian. And as I mentioned, the questions and comments are rolling in here. In reference to your speaking up, what if a person makes numerous attempts to speak up, but it gets ignored constantly? How does this person make himself or herself be heard?
Wow. Okay. You are talking to the right person, because that is the story of my life. And the thing is, remember my Michael Jordan quotes, right? You just cannot give up. We have to be the change we want to see, whether it's a small change or a big change. In my case, it's a big change. I'm trying to get organizations to recognize that their institutional practices are falling way short of enabling a level playing field for men and women to rise to executive leadership levels. And what I would say is you have to be very collaborative, very respectful, but you slowly turn up the heat. Performance plans where you're trying to improve performance of an employee, and you do progressive change in terms of discipline, you have to apply the same approach in trying to influence large scale change. You just have to keep doing it. So for example, you start out maybe on just social media outside the organization, then you bring it inside the organization. You talk to different kinds of people. You look for people who have influence in the organization. I'm going to give you a great example. Recently, an executive mentor agreed and allowed me essentially to come speak before his group. So I'm pretty excited. I'm going to be speaking to a large group of automotive executives where there are very few women in the room. And it's going to be very uncomfortable, but it's going to be a way, with his help, that we're going to introduce this topic of gender equality in a setting where it's never talked about. And so I would want to offer hope that things can change, but you just have to be persistent in a respectful way. And I am more than happy if you'll reach out to me. You see my website, my email address here, elba@showme50.org. I'll be glad to talk to you and give you some tips. But at the end of the day, it's called just progressive influencing. You do it professionally, but you don't give up. In my case, I have ratcheted up. I recently wrote an internal blog, an open letter to the CEO, and I provided some specific examples. It was very respectful, but it's what we have to do. We have to speak up. I've even written a letter to the board. So you just got to be persistent but respectful.
Love it. Persistent and while being respectful. But going back to the quote we heard, fake it until you become it. So,
Yeah.
So Elba, I think you're going to add to your lead. I'm going to ask you a question here. You're adding to your lead of appearances on Supply Chain Now Radio, which is always neat to collaborate with you. You and I are going to serve as co-hosts for an upcoming podcast on Saturday, February 9th, if I have my dates right. It's going to be hosted by our friends over at HLB Gross Collins, which is a leading accounting firm here in Atlanta. Tell us about what we're going to be talking about.
We're going to do something pretty exciting, something unusual for supply chain world. But as I said earlier, in these times of high pressure, you've got to find things that are unique and different and radical. So we're going to be talking about taxes, trade, and tribulation. You know how you say trials and tribulations. So trade, taxes, and tribulation. We've got a great lineup. We're going to talk about what's going on in the supply chain world, and also even covering things like tax credits, R&D credits, and what's going on with trade. Particularly, we know that we've renegotiated the old NAFTA. We have a new trade agreement between Mexico, the US, and Canada. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about a little what's going on in the economy, and it's going to be a great podcast. So looking forward to that. February 9th, right, is when we're going to record it?
That's right. We're going to go live at 10 a.m. on February 9th, and you can learn more and listen to us live at supplychainnowradio.com. So looking forward to that, Elba. And one last question here, Elba, if you're okay. Typically, we don't recognize our audience and let them pose a question verbally, but if you're good with it, I thought we'd experiment. Maria has her hand up, and I'm going to see if she'd like to pose her question to you herself, Elba.
Absolutely.
Hang on one second here. All right, Maria, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, please, the floor is yours.
I would like to know did you get a response from the CEO of your company and you said the board? Have you gotten any response? I know I have seen the responses, the negative responses as well in the blog, but has there been any reaction to your very well thought out and documented blog?
Thank you so much for the courage to ask me that question. And I'll tell you that I'm going to have the courage to tell you the truth and the answer, which is no. I have not had a response. But as I said before, we cannot give up. We have to be the change we want to see. And as long as we're respectful, and Scott and you and I talked earlier about assuming positive intent, and it really goes back to PTK too, right? Listen, I think that people, they want to do the right thing, but organizations are complicated. Life is complicated. There are many things that we're not aware of. I truly believe in my heart that organizations and people want to do the right thing. I think that sometimes they're also faced with fear. There are probably legal implications that we may not be aware of, but I have in my heart the knowledge that I believe that people will do the right thing, and I do look forward to a written response both from the board and from our executive leadership.
Terrific. And Maria, thanks for that question. Elba, thanks for your frankness in its answer. And nothing's easy, but really appreciate being able to talk about some of these subjects here as part of our webinar on Supply Chain Now Radio. So Elba, that is gonna we're right up against our time window here, so we're gonna move kind of into wrap up if that works for you.
Yes, please.
Okay. So again, thanks to our audience for being very participative in our Q&A session. Great questions, and Elba, I really appreciate you taking the time and offering your insight on each of those. And for that matter, Elba, thanks for your time and all of your perspective today, and fighting with us through some of the Murphy's Law challenges that still are around with technology. So we're going to be concluding our session this afternoon on a few final items. First off, Supply Chain Now Radio has fairly recently rolled out a text to subscribe feature for our webinar programming. So if you're a regular attendee for our webinars, no need to continue to register on a one-off basis for each of our webinar programs. To be auto-enrolled for all of our webinars, text supply chain to 42828. We'll take it from there. Of course, you can always opt out of any particular webinar or the program as it is, as you see fit. And we hope that this helps make your life a little easier and saves you some time. Next up, we want to make sure you're aware of I4Transport's 3PL and Supply Chain Summit here in Atlanta in June 2019. EFT is bringing some of the biggest industry names right here to the hashtag Supply Chain City for 3 days of thought leadership and executive level networking. Cisco, Uber Freight, Land O'Lakes, DHL, and senior leaders from those organizations and many others are just a few of the companies that will be presenting. You can learn more at events.eft.com. Lastly, check out our website for our upcoming webinars, podcasts, and events, and that's supplychainnowradio.com. Be sure to mark your calendars for the 2019 Atlanta Supply Chain Awards. Nominations and sponsorships are still available, and you can learn more on the awards program at a simply entitled URL, AtlantaSupplyChainAwards.com. How about that? And if there's anything we can do for you, shoot us a note to Scott@supplychainnowradio.com, and we will do all we can to serve as a resource for you and your organization. Hey, Elba, before we conclude today's session, any final thoughts or challenges or ideas that you'd like to share with our audience?
Well, first, I just want to mention on this slide that I am going to be part of the Atlanta Supply Chain Awards evaluation team. So I'm super excited about that. And then just a quick takeaway, I would encourage you all to go back and listen to the Speak Up takeaways, because I really learned a lot from preparing for this presentation by reading quite a few articles about the challenges of speaking up. And I thought that some of those things are pretty inspiring in the fact that you may be harming others when you don't speak up, and to think about it as a way to show your commitment to the mission when you do use your skills and experiences to speak up. So I challenge you to not remain silent and speak up.
That's a great thought to finish up on today. So as we wrap up, we'd like to give a big thanks again to our guest speaker, Elba Pareja-Gallagher with Show Me 50 for this very helpful presentation and all of her valuable insight. Special thanks to our sponsors, Apex Atlanta and Talent Stream. We couldn't do it without those folks. Of course, a big thank you to our audience for participating. On behalf of Supply Chain Now Radio, this is Scott Luton concluding today's episode, and we hope to reconnect with you again real soon. Thanks, everybody.